So I'm Ivan Anderson. I was in Bomber Command in 1940 when I enlisted in Winnipeg. And I trained in Brandon, I trained in Fort Macleod down here, and I also trained at number 2 Wireless School, which is now SAIT. And that's where I had to do my Morse code. Do you know Morse code? Huh?
Yes.
What is did-it-did-dot-it?
Pardon?
What is did-it-did-dot-it? It's the way you talk. You do it with the little key, and all the dashes and dots mean letters. And you had to do 22 words a minute before you graduated from number 2 Wireless School. But while I was down in Fort Macleod, I met a nice little coal miner's daughter from Blairmore. And courted her down there for a while, and then I moved to Calgary, and she went back to her home. I didn't know whether I'd see her again or not. But one day I got a phone call at the number 2 Wireless School. She was in town visiting her married sister. So we started courting all over again, and before my course ended in November, where I would be going overseas, I decided I better ask her to marry me so nobody else would get her while I was away, which was a smart move. There were so many Army and Navy and Air Force people in Calgary in 1941. She wouldn't have lasted me out for the 5 years I was overseas. But I tied her up. We were married in 1941, October 25th. And I went overseas in the end of December. She's still with me. 67 years this year. 6 kids, 12 grandkids, 11 great-grandkids, and we're still here. Although she has got problems with COPD, I don't know if you know what that is. That's a disease of the lungs. She's been in the hospital 3 times in the last year. The last one because one of her lungs collapsed. However, that's not getting on to my story, is it? I was flying in, just a minute here. Wellington bombers. That's what they looked like. We had a crew of 5. We've done 30 trips in this bomber. D. Donald, only this one doesn't say D. Donald, this says Y something. But ours was D. Donald. We've done 30 trips, which was a tour. That's where you get this tour pin here. We had the chance then to come back to Canada as instructors for a year and then go back and do a second tour. But the 5 of us got along so good. 2 Americans, 2 Canadians, and 1 British pilot. International flights. We got along so good that we decided that instead of coming back to Canada, we would do our second tour right away. Second tour would only mean 15 more trips instead of the 30 that we had done. So we picked up 2 more crew, a flight engineer, because we went on 2 Halifaxes, which are 4 motors. We picked up a flight engineer and a mid-upper gunner. So we had a crew of 7 on the Halifax. That's what the Halifax looked like. That's the one I had to jump out of. The bombardier was on here and he manned the front turret. We had the rear turret and the mid-upper turret. Flight engineer was here, I was down here, the navigator was down here, and the pilot was up here. Coming back from Cologne, which was our target that night, in July the 3rd, 1943, we were attacked by night fighters. 1 night fighter, at least that's what it was. And he shot, stay there, mess. He shot through the 2 starboard motors here, started them both on fire. The flight engineer said, you have about 30 seconds before the fire gets back to the wings there. And what was in the wings?
Fuel.
Fuel, yeah, 2,500 gallons of fuel in each wing. I ran upstairs and pushed the fire extinguisher in the motors. We have fire extinguishers in each motors. And it died down a little bit, but all flamed up again. I guess the fuel lines were ruptured with the cannon shells. So the order came to abandon ship. That means look for your parachute and hope you find it. We never wore our parachutes because our parachutes were on the front. They just snapped in. Got my parachute, put it on. Right in the bottom here, did you see that Lancaster out in the thing? There's a little space underneath here, about 2 feet by 2.5 feet, that you can open from the inside. That's where I jumped out of. And the navigator and the bombardier and the flight engineer. Rear turret. He called up on the intercom and said, hydraulics are gone, I can't turn my turret around to get out. The turret moves like this, and it has to go straight there before you could open the doors to get out. And you had to get out because that's where your parachute was. The parachute can't be in the turret with you because it's all full of ammunition. However, I called my mid-upper gunner and said, go back and hand crank Johnny around so he can get out, and then the intercom went dead, so I didn't know if he did or not. I found out after. He's from Calgary. When we have our reunions here, I asked him, and he said, yeah, he went back and hand cranked him. Johnny was getting out of the turret when he jumped out of the side door there. But Johnny didn't get out. He was killed in the crash of our plane. The other 6 were alive. So I put my parachute on and jumped out of the plane. You're supposed to count to 10 before you pull it, because if you pull it too quick, parachute might get caught in the tail of the plane and you'd go down with the plane in flames. So you count 1, 2, 10. That's all I counted. But by then I was plenty ways away from there. We're up at 17,000 feet, which is 3.5 miles up in the air. It took me 18 minutes to come down. At least I looked at my time before I jumped out and then looked at when I went down. But there's no oxygen up there. You pass out 2 or 3 times until you get down to about 9,000 feet or 8,500 feet where there is oxygen. Then you stay awake. The rest of you are drifting down. So as I was drifting, I saw somebody over in a distance, and I hollered, said, "Who are you?" And it was my navigator, Frank Fred, an American. But I never did see him when I landed. I guess the wind takes you all over the place. I landed in the backyard of a Belgian farm, got rid of my parachute and hid it, which we're supposed to do, and started walking away from where our plane crashed. It had crashed quite a while before I got down, because I could hear all the ammunition exploding and that. It's a good thing the bombs were gone, because we dropped the bombs quite a while before that. I started walking away from where the plane crashed, and I come across my flight engineer. He was sitting down wondering if it was a dream he was having. And I said, "No, it's no dream, Huey. Let's get out of here." So we started walking. We walked the rest of the night and then hid up in haystacks or forests during the day. Sometimes we'd go into fields of grain, which were this high. You'd go in there and lie down, nobody could see you. So we walked for 4 or 5 nights, hid up during the day in these places. And we're getting a little brave. I guess we started a little too early one night before it was too dark. And we come across a town in Belgium. So we skirted the town. Didn't want to walk through it. Walked around it and then started on. There was a boy and girl came behind us on bicycles and said, "Avez-vous femme?" Which was, "Parlez-vous français?" Avez-vous femme is literally, "Are you famished? Are you hungry?" And we said, "Yeah, oui." I took French for 2 years, so I knew what they were saying. And they said, "Come." And we went back to their parents' home. And they fed us bacon and eggs, 2-liter bottles of wine. That's all they drink over there. They had some of their friends come in and look us over. We fly in our battle dress, but we'd torn all our Canada badges off and our wings off and our ranks off. These friends of theirs came in and looked us over and went out, and half an hour later they came back with civilian clothes for us. So we took off our battle dresses and got into the civvy clothes with the French bonnet or whatever you call it, beret. And we looked just like Belgian or French people. We stayed in that house in their attic that night. The next day, the German Gestapo went through all the town looking, searching the houses, because somebody had said a couple of airmen walked through the night before. We were in the attic. They never came up to where we were. When they were gone, about 10 blocks past, the owner of the house came and said, "You better get out of here, because if I'm caught harboring you, I will be shot." And he would have been. So we gathered what clothes we had. They took our battle dress, And we crawled out on our hands and knees out through the hedge into the forest. And he said, I'll send somebody to see you tomorrow in the forest. So we stayed out there that day, and then two people came on bicycles and more or less interrogated us, make sure we were who we were, who we said we were. And they said, we're going to take you to our place in the next town. So before we started out, they went behind the granary and came back dressed as Catholic priests. This was the underground in Belgium. It was their duty to try and get all the flyers that were down back to England so they could fly again. So I went on the bus with one of them, my flight engineer. I rode the bicycle with the other one to the next town. And their place was a seminary with another 15, 18 priests. Their tables set out there, chocolates, fruit, wine, beer, everything set out. So I said to Huey, let's stay here the rest of the war. But that wasn't their intention. We stayed with them for a couple of days, and then they said, we're taking you into Brussels today. So we went into Brussels, and you know those photograph places, the kiosks that they have in some places here, where you go in and drop a toonie in and you get 3 pictures? They had those in Brussels. Put in 2.5 florins, you get 3 pictures. The priests took the pictures and took us back to their seminary. The next day they came back with false passports, false identification cards, with our pictures in them, stamped with the corporate seal of the burgomaster of the town. So there we were. My name was Jean Lefebvre, traveling salesman. But I'm going to digress just a little bit. When we leave the plane, when we get on the plane, we're giving a escape kit. And if you have to jump out of the plane, you take the escape kit with you, if you remember. In the escape kit was a silk map of Germany, France, and Belgium. There was German money, French money, Belgian money, French francs, and that. There was a tin cup that expands and then you collapse. There was a tin of pills which you used to put in the water if you're getting water from a stream. To make sure it was pure, you put a pill in there and that purifies the water. And what else? Oh, we had a chocolate bar, about 4 by 6. But it wasn't an ordinary chocolate bar. It was highly concentrated, 24 pieces. Each piece was enough nutrition and energy for one whole day. So you just take one little square off and you could walk the whole day and not be tired. But you're looking around. So we had that with us, and as we were walking, we were hiding in a field one day, and there was a farmer going through with his dog, and his dog could smell us, so we came out and showed him the map and asked him where we were, and he showed us where we were, However, I've went back far enough now, and I'm going to go back to the priests who looked after us. So they took us back to their seminary for 2 or 3 days. And then they said, we're going to take you into Brussels again, to another house in Brussels. So we went in there, and there was 3 or 4 other people that were in there that were trying to get out of Belgium without the Germans finding out. So we stayed with them for a couple of days, then we got on the train in Belgium, in Brussels, and went to Paris. We stayed in a hotel in Paris that night. The next day, going down to get on the train to Bordeaux in southern France. We're headed down to Spain, because if we could sneak into Spain, we could get to the British consulate and they would get us back to England. But we were captured by the Gestapo. And right then, you say what your real name, rank, and serial number is. No more Jean Lefebvre, traveling salesman. Ivan Anderson, Flight Lieutenant Ivan Anderson, J1706 RCAF. They took us to Gestapo prison in Paris. It was called Friends, F-R-E-S-N-E-S. And I was there for 5 weeks before the Red Cross came in to confirm that I was an officer of the Royal Canadian Air Force, belonged in a prison camp according to the Geneva Convention, and they said, get him there. So they loaded me on the train and took me to Stalag Luft-III. You know where that is, don't you? Stalag Luft-III, you know where that is?
No, not really. Not really.
The Great Escape. They changed these things. They're trying to mix me up here. They take things down and...
Gotta keep you thinking.
Pardon?
Gotta keep you thinking.
Yeah, I know. Where was my license plate? Oh,
It's
there
right
it
here.
is. Yeah. That's what my license plate is. Stalag Luft-III. You know where Stalag Luft-III is? It's in Upper Silesia, in Poland. That's the prison camp I was sent to, Stalag Luft-III. Did you see the movie The Great Escape? You haven't seen it? It's a 4-star movie made in 1963. And it was one of our men that supervised the whole movie. When Hollywood wanted to make the movie, he said, no way unless I supervise it so that it'll be authentic. It was Canadians that were in there. Hollywood wanted Americans. We let them use Steve McQueen so he could ride the bicycle and jump over the thing and get caught 2 or 3 times and bring some information back. But it was all Canadians that were in the camp until the Americans started their daylight raids, and they were coming down by the hundreds, and then they had to overflow the camp with them too. However, if you haven't seen the movie, you have to see it. It's shown about every 6 weeks or 2 months on the History Channel. You know where the History Channel is? So if you see it again, The Great Escape, that's the camp I was in. So they took me from Paris to Stalag Luft-III, and we're digging tunnels all over the place. just to keep as many German guards there as possible. Every time the Germans found a tunnel, they would flood it and say, you can't escape from this camp. They didn't know that that tunnel took 14 months to dig. 30 feet straight down, and then 350 feet outside the fence. It had to be 30 feet down because the Germans had planted microphones along the top of the dirt, the thing, to see if they could hear us digging. But 30 feet down, they couldn't hear us. All the tunnel was shored up with bedboards from our beds. The tunnels, the huts that we were in, oh, what is that?
Prisoners of war.
Right. I use that to make a drawing here so you can see. This was our huts. 12 rooms, 12 people in each room. How many people in there?
144.
You're right. You come to the head of the class. I have a present for you after. 144 people in there. The Germans used to have a roll call maybe once a day or once every 2 days, just to check and see if anybody was escaping. There's a lot of ingenious ways that they did escape. The truck would come in with a load of bread with a tarp over it. And as they unloaded the bread into the kitchen in the camp, they would roll the tarp up over as they were getting it. One of our fellows talking to the driver over a way, and one of our guys climbed up and rolled himself in that tarp. And the driver went out, drove out. The fellow stayed in the tarp until night, and then he unrolled himself and started on his trip, try and see how far he'd go. A lot of them we allowed to escape like that because we wanted to know what the outside area around the camp was, because there was going to be 144 go out of that hut when the tunnel was finished. So he'd go out and he'd survey the situation where the railroads were and all that. And then he'd come back in. Of course, he'd have to go in the cooler for 10 days. And then he'd come and he'd make drawings of what it's like out there, where the rail station was, where all the trains were, and so. But when the Germans wanted to roll call, one of our fellows would stay in the hut because we would have maybe a couple of people sick that couldn't go on roll call or parade. So the guard would come and our man would take him around into each. He'd say one sick in here, 2 sick in there, then no more down there. And by the time they got turned around, these 2 crossed over to these rooms. And he came up, 2 more in this room, 1 more in this room. And that accounted for the ones that were digging in the tunnel. Instead of 6 in there, they counted, instead of 3 in there, they counted 6. So that accounted for the 3 that were in the tunnel. So They never did find out that we were doing that, but they weren't as smart as us anyway. Okay, and in March of 1944, the Russians were coming so close. You could hear their guns, and everything else. The Germans were all refugees. They were going in front of the Russian tanks and artillery. We could see them going by the camp. Then the Germans came in and said, "We're marching you out of here." So 6 o'clock in the morning. So they gave us a Red Cross parcel each, and we were ready to march out. And then they decided they wouldn't start that day, we'd go the next day. So we'd have to go back into the huts. This was in January of 45. We had to start going out. Snow. I made a sleigh out of the rest of my bedboards that I saved from the people who were shoring up all the tunnel and making these little wagons to haul the dirt out from the tunnel. We started on the, if you want to see another movie, Forced March to Freedom. That was us, in January of 45, ahead of the Russians. We walked for 4 or 5 days, staying in barns or houses or haylofts at night, and then starting out. We had 1 bowl of barley soup or porridge a day, and ersatz coffee. So about 5 or 6 days, the Russians were coming so fast they had to load us onto rail cars. A rail car that held 4 horses and 2 cows held 60 airmen, standing room only, with a pail in the corner. You know what for. So for 5 days we traveled in that boxcars. They would stop every once in a while because they'd have to pull off of the line to let their troop train go through to try and stop the Russians. So then they'd go back on the line, and we ended up about 50 miles south of Berlin at Stalag Luft-III Luckenwalde. I'll give you some handouts there, mister, when Darren, that's your teacher, isn't it? Yeah. Right. How did I know that? He looks like a Darren. So I'll give him some handouts, and he can make copies for you of where the prison camps were and of different things and that. And what was the special charge? Oh, with Darren, it's just a high five, eh?
Better be. I don't think he'd like to kiss you.
All the lady teachers, I always said that is a small charge, and they said, "What's the charge?" And I said, "Hug and a kiss." So, so for 5 days we traveled in the train up to just south of Berlin, 50 miles south of Berlin. They dumped us off there, and we stayed there. And one day in April of 45. All our guards disappeared. They just left. After sabotaging our lights and water, they just took off, left us by ourselves. We're expecting this, and we're all prepared for it. We had our electricians and plumbers and everything all set to go. And they left at 12 after sabotaging everything. 3 o'clock in the morning, we had everything working again. Lights, water, everything.